Welcome to our fourth episode of Season 1 of Polarizing Conversations. Season 1 is supported by Inspiring Communities, and we have the honor of being joined today by Paul Walsh, a member of their Atlantic Changemakers Council. Paul is a disability advocate located in his hometown of St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador. He holds both a Bachelor of Commerce and a Master's of Business degrees from Memorial University. He has also completed a graduate certificate in project management and holds a chartered manager designation from CIM, or Chartered Managers Canada. He has lived with the experience of a physical disability, having been diagnosed with cerebral palsy at birth. Paul is proud of his disability culture. He has had a successful career in private enterprise, including 2 years in banking and 33 years in a variety of positions with a private sector public utility. In addition, Paul was an instructor at Memorial University for over 30 years. Currently, he is the Chief Executive Officer of the Autism Society of Newfoundland and Labrador, where he leads a staff of over 20 professionals dedicated to serving those with autism, those who love them, and those who work with them. Paul is also an active volunteer, serving on a wide variety of boards and commissions. His main areas of interest in his volunteer work are disability rights, inclusion and diversity, social justice, and human rights. He is past chair of the St. John's Transportation Commission, a member of the Royal St. John's Regatta Committee, and an active church volunteer. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you. It's great to be here, Vanessa.
And when we talked about the question or the guiding question that we would explore in this conversation, we landed on the question of how can disability frame our perception of the right to choose. And as you know, I was interested in exploring a theme of right to choose on this podcast because, of course, right to choose can lead to polarization. So I'm curious, and maybe we can start with the big question, which is how can disability frame our perception of the right to choose in your view?
The disability can affect and inform that question simply because of the whole concept in our society of the duty of care. So a lot of the people that I have the privilege to work with every day talk about services they are provided, whether I'm working here in my job or working in the disability community, and they'll say, well, there's certain services that are needed to support what we do to encourage diversity and inclusion, but there's only certain things provided. To when they inquire of those who provide the services, well, what about other options? What about alternative therapies? What about other choices? They're often told, well, this is what we do, and you either take this or there's nothing nothing for you. That tends to be very limiting. And if we go back to the duty of care concept and apply a sort of the moral compass to the concept of what is it in society that we really owe to everyone because we're all equal, then people call them accommodations, whatever you want to call it. It has to fit the individual, and the individual has to have that right to decide of what's the appropriate care for them, and they have to be the sole decider. There's a great phrase in the disability community that some say is etched on my forehead. I say it so often, and that's called "Nothing about us for us."
Yeah.
And in so many cases, especially if we go to what's known as the pathologizing medical model, in so many cases around disability, decisions are made by groups of people, none of whom have lived experience with disability. And people will say, oh, well, I knew somebody with a disability. Or they'll say, my friend, child, husband, parent, partner, whatever, has a disability. That is a lived experience, but it's not lived experience with disability. So you noted in the introduction, I have cerebral palsy. I've had cerebral palsy since I was born 59 years ago. I don't know any different, but it gives me a lens that's different than other people's. So my cerebral palsy manifests itself in, I walk with a different gait. I have some balance challenges and whatnot, but I don't use a wheelchair. So I don't have lived experience of plex like a wheelchair. I don't have lived experience of what life is like with a a neurodivergent condition or with any other intellectual disability. I know when I know. Well, honestly, and I've said this to people, and people have criticized before, and I really don't care. I'm tired of people that don't know anything about me making decisions for me. And really, what a disability lens informs about the right to choose is the choices have to be made by those who know and those who are informed. And that means those with lived experience. You can't decide on what's right for, this is a joke. It's not to admit because I'm talking about pets here, but you can't decide on what's the right health approach for cats by interviewing a panel full of dogs. You have to have experience as a cat. You can't tell somebody with a disability what's good for them if you don't know what it's like to have a disability. So those of us with disabilities, and that covers what a friend of mine calls a constellation, it's not anything linear, truly a broad group. Those of us with disabilities need to be able to make the choices and inform those who are putting the policy work together, putting the medical work together to say, no, this is what is needed.
Yeah. Yeah, as you were talking there, what was coming up for me was this idea of letting people choose what is best for them. And the way that society is structured right now, that is often not the case. Whether it's a newcomer group or women's rights, disability rights, whatever it is. And I think that leads to polarization, this notion that people might be able to know what is best for them.
Right. You have a situation where government spending we've all heard, very recently with the meetings of the first ministers in Ottawa about how much money is spent on healthcare in this country.
Uh-huh.
And it's true. It's a tremendous amount of money, and we're very blessed. I'm very happy to be Canadian and have a public healthcare system. That said, is that healthcare system giving me the outcomes that I need? And if it's not, is it really money that I want to see spent? And, medicine, healthcare, which is, important to everybody, but for those with the disability community is very critical.
Yeah.
A person of whom I am a big fan, who I was put on to by a friend of mine, is a lady by the name of Rosemary Garland Thompson. Now, Professor Garland Thompson is professor of English and bioethics at Emory University and has lived experience with disability. And she talks about medicine as being a business. And, I'm looking down at a particular quote here, health is identified in medicine as the absence of certain traits, such as disease, and everything else is normal. And that's become an ideological tool. The most powerful, in some people's words, the most powerful ideological tool of the 20th century. So that we're saying, you don't fit the normal, so we're going to go fix you. And the individual with disability, me, is saying, no, I'm fine. I'm perfect the way I am. I don't need to be fixed. Your leg works differently than everybody else's. Or your mind works differently than anybody else's. Or your whatever works different. And I'm not talking about things that obviously, if you have a heart attack, you need cardiac care. That's irrelevant. But you have a disability, and you, again, going back to the introduction, I am very proud of my disability culture. I wasn't always. And those of us either born with a disability or more challenging, those who acquire a disability, because then you have a before and after. The before and after is really hard. I don't have that lived experience. You really go through a process before you can see the beauty of your disability culture. I was literally challenged. A friend of mine, who also has a disability, 3 inches from my nose, saying, you need to learn to embrace your disability. And what you realize is that disability, whatever it may be, and I have friends and acquaintances that have disabilities ranging from something that is slight to something that is very complex, many with co-occurrent conditions, many with invisible disabilities. Whatever that is, that's part of your identity. So we've gone through this whole exercise, and words are powerful, always changing, of, society wondering, well, what do I call this person, right? And so we went through this whole exercise coming out of the UN Convention in 92 of person with. So I'm a person with a disability, or I'm a person with autism, or I'm a person with Down syndrome. And for many of us in the disability community, we hated this. And I don't use that, because that I can't separate me, the person, from me, the disability.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I say I'm disabled. I know a lot of the people I work with here who will simply identify as autistic. People say, well, am I allowed to call you that? No, you have to ask the person what they want to be called, and whatever they choose, that's what you've got to call them. Again, putting the choice back on the person. But this whole, the medical system's going to fix you. I told my doctor asked me one day, if because there's surgery, so my legs are different legs, and there's surgery that will adjust the length of your legs. He said, have you ever considered that? Could you, we could make your legs same length. I said, no, and I won't. And he goes, what do you mean? I said, I'm not interested. He said, well, that can fix the da-da-da-da. I said, I don't care. This is how I am. You're not going to change my identity. I don't want that fixed. But in his mind, and he was trying to be helpful and not being critical, in his mind, he's trained to fix. What he doesn't get is that I'm not broken. And those of us with disabilities aren't broken. We just need to be able to have our own right to make those choices and say, no, I'm perfectly disabled.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot there. And, as you were talking, you explored a little bit of the, I guess, commercialization of medicine and how we use that to make decisions. And when we were originally talking about this topic, because I had asked your thoughts on a few themes related to right to choose, one of the things that we had discussed was medical assistance in dying, which is, a big topic nationally right now. And I thought you had some interesting views there, because it is a polarizing topic, and I'm wondering if you'd be open to exploring them.
Sure. For many, I'll just speak for myself, but for many, I know that others in the disability community are with me. There's a lot of concern around MAID, or medical aid in dying. And let me state up front that if an individual who is able to and has the capacity to, at the moment of, decides that's how they want to leave this world, I'm totally supportive of that. That is their right to choose. They are making that decision at the moment it occurs. So I know it was sort of recently, individual, terminal cancer, had the capacity to do so and chose on a particular weekend, informed everybody that this weekend I'm taking that option, and she did. Totally and absolutely support that decision. Totally and absolutely support the ability of our legal system to allow that decision. Mm-hmm. But what we're seeing right now with MAID is trying to push this further, trying to say that, well, I'm 59. So I'm 59 and I like to think I have my full capacity. So I'm going to write like a medical directive to say, if I'm 79 and I'm suffering from dementia, I want MAID. No way. Not a chance. Cannot happen. And I simply say that because I need to be able to make that decision when it happens, not 20 years before. And then I suddenly lose capacity. And then I don't have the right to change my mind. And somebody else is saying, oh, look, he wrote this on this paper. No, that's an incredibly slippery slope. That's an incredible step towards, and this is where it gets polarizing, sorry. Yep, that's a step towards eugenics. That's a step towards saying, and I'll put it as bluntly as I can, that's what step to saying, this individual has become either too much trouble or too expensive, because we have a publicly funded system, So our best thing to do is to thin out the herd here and invest in everybody else. That is where all of a sudden we lose the right to decide, because we're in a position, that individual's in a position perhaps where they can't make the decision themselves. So all of a sudden the doctor's doing it or whatnot. I'm also seeing, and many people have said, I'm sure that's not true. I know it's true. Talk to the people involved, know the people involved intimately, where we're healthy patients with disabilities have been in a doctor's office. There's been an advocate who I know very, very well working with them. And the advocate sat there while the person was going through, I've got this problem, that problem, the other problem, and I'd like you to help me. And after exhausting a couple of ideas, the doctor has said to that individual, have you ever considered me? And the advocate at that point will stand up and say, that's neither legal or morally appropriate for you to say, which I totally agree with. It has to be the individual's decision. It can't be coerced. It can't be influenced. Certainly can't come from somebody who's supposedly there to provide care, because we go back to that whole concept of the duty of care. So if you see what's before, and the name of the legislation is escaping me, C-203, I might have that wrong. The legislation that's before Parliament right now to expand medical aid and dying. Some of the things they're talking about is, and I have very huge concerns around mental health because I have a number of friends that deal with a mental health disability. And the concept that we're going to open Medicaid to those with mental health concerns. We're going to allow people who are considering Medicaid to donate their organs. We're going to allow people who are dealing with depression to avail of Medicaid. And most recently, we're going to allow minors to avail of Medicaid. That's not an appropriate solution. That's not a duty of care. That's a cost minimization approach. The reality is and I've heard one of these nationwide open line shows having this debate talking about these things. And who's on the panel? A bunch of psychologists, a bunch of psychiatrists, nobody with a disability. And they're promoting all these things. And there's no concept of appropriate end-of-life care. There's no concept of appropriate palliative care. There's no concept of what our Indigenous friends know so well of caring for their elderly. There's a concept of, well, if this happens, then, we'll give them this option. It's the low-cost option. Very bluntly. And I see it that way. And I know that is a very polarizing comment. But for those of us with disabilities, those of us who understand history realize that during World War II, people with disabilities were the first victims of the Nazis. That eugenics is real. See this slippery slope with that and saying, if I can't make my own decision, nobody's making it for me. And I don't want my parliament legalizing the ability for others to decide my fate.
Yeah.
I respected in an answer, I'm not sure.
No, that was great, and there's a lot in there. And actually, last year I renewed my will and power of attorney statement, and I did a lengthy questionnaire, I guess you'd call it, to help me make decisions for if I ever had to give power of attorney to someone. And actually going through that process, and I don't identify as having a disability, but even so, I surprised myself in the results that came out, in the sense of that I would want to live on life support in certain conditions and all of these types of things that I thought I had an understanding of what I would have wanted, but going through that process was very eye-opening for me. And, as you were talking, I agree it is a polarizing topic, and I think about, how do we make space for all of these different perspectives as, because there were a lot of layers in what you commented on, from the legislative system, the medical system, including people having advocates, people being able to give power of attorney to someone in certain cases, and what those decisions might be, allowing people to change their minds. So it opens up a big field that requires a lot of negotiation.
It does, but at the very heart of it, and if you talk to someone like Michael Bach at the and first, I can't remember the exact name, but the very big Canadian leader on diversity and inclusion, like he advocates. You talked about the power of attorney. Okay, so let's focus on that for a second. So put yourself. And by the way, you say you don't identify as a disability. There's two realities of life. You either have a disability or you'll get one, because that's the age we are. So you'll get there. I'm 15. You're not. So I can tell that.
Yeah.
So you said to Dr. Michael and what he's doing around the power of attorney thing. So if I'm, let's say I'm the parent. I know people in this situation. So I'm a parent about 35, 40 years ago. My wife and I gave birth. This is not me. I'm making up a story here, but this is a couple that I know. Gave birth to a son. We have 2 other children, and that son is pretty significantly intellectually disabled.
Okay.
So now it's 40 odd years later. I'm 68, 69, 70. I've retired from my career. My other 2 children are living in XYZ. I am my partner, provide entire care to this individual. Their life is dependent on me. And they're sitting in front of somebody saying, so what happens when I die? What happens to this individual when I die? So there's a gentleman whose name I didn't write down, so I wouldn't have that. So because I thought I'd remembered, and of course I don't.
That's okay.
Who was vice president of logistics for Walgreens in the United States. He spoke here in St. John's a number of years ago, and as soon as this podcast is over, we're going to say, yeah, that's his name. But anyhow,
you can send it to me to include in the show notes. Yeah.
It might come to me at times.
Yes, that's no problem.
A big advocate for the employment of disabled persons in the United States, probably has been at the forefront of it, has a son who identifies as disabled. But he began his presentation with words that I've never forgotten, even though I have forgotten his name. Randy Lewis. Yeah, Randy Lewis. The dream of every parent of a child with a disability is to live one day longer than their child. Or that they'll always be there to look after them. So what Michael Bach and others, some people here that I'm involved with, have been talking about is building a supportive decision-making model, so that there's a group of people around an individual that understand the individual and help him make or her, or they make decisions if the sole caregiver is no longer there. Because the alternative is a legal process called guardianship, and while it still may have its place in certain things, it's very, very, I don't know if draconian is too heavy a word, but it's a big decision. You're taking away a person's capacity there. They can't contract, they can't have a bank account once guardianship is in place. The decision-making model around supported decision-making is they still maintain their ability to contract. They still maintain their bank account and whatnot. They just have a group of advisors and it's a small group around them. But it's the individuals that those individuals who still take that person making the decision and if, whatnot. This is not a group. You would build that, the parents of the individual would build a group around those folks that they knew understood the individual. It's not a doctor coming in. It's not somebody from an outside agency coming in who's going to make a decision based on other factors like economics or other what they be practical reasons. It's somebody who's acting in that individual's best interests and is enabling the individuals to make the choices that they can make. That goes to that point. It's on power of attorney, right? And whatnot. And further, it goes down the road to get back to what we talked about with May. You still have to have a process there that protects the individual's rights, and my favorite word, their dignity, to bring them in control of their own life. And that, if we are to legalize a control over when we leave this life, because, before, we left this life naturally, not of our own choosing, whether it was by accident or by natural causes, our life ended when our life ended. But if all of a sudden we're going to insert laws that saying, no, you could determine that date if you'd like, then that power's got to rest with that individual. It cannot go with anybody else. Nobody else has the lived experience of that individual. Nobody else knows what that individual thinks, feels, acts. Nobody else has that lens.
Yeah, well, yes, exactly.
There's an absolute there. In my world, there's an absolute there.
Yeah, and it's interesting, there's a couple of threads I like to pick up. And even for me, I did that whole process because I realized, something could happen to me at any time, and I wouldn't want to leave the decisions if I was unable to make them without informing someone in some sort of way as to, how I might make my own decisions, even if it wasn't exactly, the exact same decision. But I want to ask you a little bit about what you said around instead of a guardianship, which even as a separate example, I think popular culture explored that concept a little bit when we learned a bit more about Britney Spears' conservatorship, where, it's not exactly the same context, but in some ways it's similar, where someone's, I guess, autonomy was taken away. That concept of, and the words, I'm not sure if I'll get them right, but you said a panel of advisors. So
It
help
that are close to the individual.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and who may have different expertise, but to help that person make their own decisions. How common is that you've seen?
There's a big movement for it in Ontario. I know I was talking to some friends in Ontario. There is a proposal here in Newfoundland and Labrador about it, so it's becoming more and more common. You talked about a different expertise those individuals have. Their expertise is, I know this individual. It's not an expertise in law or in medicine or in physiotherapy or anything else. It's just because maybe they're siblings, maybe they're an aunt, maybe they're the next door neighbor, but someone who has known that individual. So therefore, while they don't have the lived experience of that individual, they've observed the lived experience of that individual, so they have a better understanding. So it's not a question of having a certain skill set that you would bring to that. And that panel, because panel sounds like a group of old men who look like me who sit around a board table, it's more of just 2 or 3 people. It's a small grouping of people. But the choices remain there. Like the guardianship is illegal. You mean at court? That's a legal process. I will confess with some happiness that I'm not familiar with the Britney Spears. But I'm sure there are similarities. But it's just, we can debate it from different kinds of processes, but it's what's in that, what ensures the dignity of the individual and the ability for them to make their own mind up. Because so here's another polarizing comment. If we made everybody, to my mind, the word normal doesn't exist. Okay.
Yeah, normal being a statistical concept. Yes, I understand.
Yeah, it's not even that. I think it's a great fictional concept. But if we wanted to make everybody normal, What do we lose in the world? If you eliminate, see, I think that those with disabilities, I don't care, and I don't like the word severe, but whatever severity you want to put on it, however many co-occurring conditions there are, I think everybody brings something to the table for the diversity of a society. So, I am a Newfoundlander by birth who's lived elsewhere in Canada, who has Irish ancestry, who has a disability, who went to business school, who worked in the corporate world, and now who works in the not-for-profit world. That's what I bring to the table. And everybody, regardless of their where they're from, or what their disability is, or what their education is, or what they do for a living, or how they see the world, brings something. And that means we're not going to always agree. But what I think we can all agree on is that we all should be equally valued. And what worries me in a lot of these discussions, and I talked about the concept of moral compass, especially when we start pathologizing things, putting medical terms around what's acceptable versus unacceptable, or what some Victorian definition of what behavior is supposed to look like, or whatever, then we take away that value. Then we take away that diversity. We take away what the person, the individual, their value, their dignity, what they contribute, and we say, we value that less. And the moment a society takes a certain group of people, whether historically they be people of different color or different gender or whatever, and say, we value them less, is a very rapid, slippery slope to destruction. And that's kind of where we are. It's kind of like we're dealing with the fact that we have an aging population by saying, so how do we thin them out? And that's as opposed to valuing the contribution that everybody, regardless of their, as the expression goes, lot in life, what they bring, because everybody brings their own dignity, everybody brings their own perspective, and everybody brings their own value.
I have a reflection and a question. And my reflection is, as I thought about exploring this theme, polarizing conversations, and as it relates to what you just shared, for me, it's a bit of a spiritual endeavor. And I know that we talked briefly about this, in the sense that I think compassion is something that is an antidote to polarization. And in order to be compassionate towards someone, you have to be genuinely curious about both their experience, the hardships, the joys. And we talked a lot about the joys with Shriti in our last episode. So I think, for me, I agree with you in the sense that it's like, how do we create the space to allow this to happen? And my question, and depending where the conversation goes, it could be our closing question, but what do you think makes letting people make their own decisions so polarizing?
There's this nasty word in the English language that comes up a lot, and that word is control. And many of us, and I won't exclude myself from this conversation, like to be in control. And if we think in our own way that we know better, and we know what a person might want, then we may wish to exercise control over that which we really have no say. So whether it's control over another individual, or out of a medical outcome, or out of a, I will think, Grandma, it's time for us to put you in the home, or whatnot. That's, in a sense, exercising control. And we can talk all day about it being compassionate. And yeah, listen, there's lots of situations where an individual needs proper care. So you can be in a situation where, we believe that our job is just, stay home and look after our child, spouse, partner, whatever, who may be going through some difficulties. We all have to understand at some point that we can't do that as an individual, right? My background in finance doesn't teach me anything about clinical care. I have to understand that. So at some point we have to reach out to other services. So
Yeah, to live in community. Yeah.
right, to living community, and also we may have to that might mean that we need appropriate home care or maybe outside home care. That's not us exercising control over that other individual. When we exercise control over another individual is when we decide without their input, without understanding what they think, without knowing them, without loving them, I know what's best for you. And that's I see this in the medical community a lot over the years. I see this in sort of that industrial complex that comes around healthcare a lot and pharmaceuticals and things like that. Here's a new service, here's a new treatment, here's a new therapy, here's a new whatever. And, this will fix you. Well, how do you know that? Because you don't know the individual. So if we're going to be compassionate, then the compassion has to understand what our boundaries are, what our own personal limitations are, and we have to put our concern and care of the individual ahead of everything else. So if you take a situation where you have, a husband and wife, or husband, wife, doesn't matter, a couple of relationship, and they lived together for a long time, and one of them gets ill. Compassion does come to a point where you say, I understand that I can't be the sole caregiver of this individual anymore because they need more. That's compassion. That's showing compassion. So that makes a whole lot of sense. But saying, I can't do this anymore, so therefore, there's a difference there. There's an understanding the individual and what they need. And I see this in so many people, and it's heartbreaking, and they go through such guilt and such pain of making that final decision. But when it's made for the right reasons, they realize that person is far better off, and they, as a couple, if it's a marital relationship, are far better off because they've made those changes. But when we walk away from situations because of our own needs, or if we are from the outside and saying, oh, I'll tell you what to do, then we get into a situation where we're asserting control, and control and compassion are almost exclusive, mutually exclusive terms.
Yeah, I agree. Because I think of control as fear-based. And, I think that would reflect also a spiritual perspective versus having compassion is necessarily love-based. And, when we talk about that word love, we often think of romantic love, but there, it is such a more, complex word. And wow.
If you want to layer, and I wasn't intending to, but if you want to layer the spiritual side, because I like to think I have some of that as well. What we call compassion, with the word compassion or caring in the spiritual way, which gets referred to as pastoral care. It's really all the same thing. It's showing the value and the understanding of the individual. It's respecting the dignity of the individual. It's understanding the individual and working with them, and enabling decisions that they are a participant in. And not something that you write on a piece of paper and book 20 years earlier say, oh, if this happens then. But something that is of the moment and of the time. And, with that understanding, and having those right care, the right care options. If we have good elder care, if we have age-appropriate residential care, we have age-appropriate respite care and professional respite care, and we have processes that respect an individual at every phase of the life of the lifespan, and we even to the point of really effective, caring, compassionate palliative care, then we are providing dignity as a society. Now, that's the we in here. Society is providing dignity to that individual and their choices right through the lifespan. That's what that to me is ensuring that the duty of care is exercised, so that the right to choose is exercised from birth through whenever we choose to leave the world, or let the world choose what we're doing.
Well, thank you so much for these perspectives. And if you had a takeaway or closing thought that you'd want people to walk away and ponder. What would it be?
ATP stands for ask the person. Any individual that you interact with, don't decide what's best for them. Don't decide what you think they should be called or how they should be treated. Ask them, respect them, value their dignity, and realize the value in the diversity.
I like that. And if I could close on that, it would be that I think underneath of asking the person is the ability to listen to their response with curiosity and empathy. And the more active listening. Yeah, the more I reflect on polarizing conversations, the more I land on the need for all of us to listen to each other. So thanks so much for being here today. It was a great conversation.
Thank you for the opportunity. I quite enjoyed it.
Thanks so much for joining me for today's polarizing conversation. Much gratitude for Inspiring Communities for supporting season 1 of this podcast series. If you like this episode, please share it and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And if you missed the other episodes, check us out at www.polarizingconversations.com. And let me know what you think. We have some exciting polarizing conversations coming up in the rest of season 1. So I sincerely hope you'll join me on this journey of finding common ground on some of our most difficult topics. Thank you.